Well, hello there, and welcome to this very powerful and transformative Friday Social Live, where we're going to talk all about one of my favorite topics, archetypes. So as I say that word, I want you to just take a minute and consider what you might think about them if you have ever heard of this word, studied it. I'm sure you probably have, especially if you're one of my students. You've definitely studied archetypes. And if you haven't, if you're new to me, or if you're just new to the concept of archetypes, what comes up when you hear the word archetype? What generates in you? I always like asking that question and questions like this before I begin diving into a topic, because what it does is it gives you a minute to find yourself in your reference points. And a lot of my work has been about, I would say, reinventing the wheel in many areas, from how I'm reinventing the wheel in terms of astrology, or reinventing the wheel in terms of intuition and intuitive skills, or being multisensory or empathic. So there's a lot that I'm constantly needing to reframe for you. And it's really important first to understand your frames of reference when it comes to things like archetypes. So in my own intuitive work over the past 2 decades, I'm going to be 50. It's really literally been that long, which is crazy for me to say. I've found that there is far more to archetypes than meets the Jungian eye. And there are actually, for example, 4 categories of archetypes that I've identified that comprise your soul contract, your destiny, your fate, your journey from fate to destiny. There's so much in the realm of archetypes. And when I was doing intuitive readings, and I still do them, I think just not necessarily sessions, but it's a skill I can't stop using. It was all about archetypes. It was all about, one could say, the parts of you, these forces in you, these creative aspects of you. There's many ways we're going to dive into what archetypes are, but there are 4 categories that I've found operate in your life. And these 4 categories, wow, they create your reality. They hold the keys to your potential. They determine what is and isn't possible in your life, these 4 categories of archetypes. And all combined, all 4 categories, which I'm going to teach you, they comprise what I would call is your soul contract, your journey with fate and destiny. And not only that, and this is some of my newer work with archetypes. I just taught a really big class on this last November called Archetypes and the Magnetics of Relationships. So that said, archetypes carry certain magnetics. And yes, indeed, either attract or repel who is in your life. So we're going to dive into a little bit of that as well. Before we get going here, because this is a social live, I do want to say hi to everybody. So I'm going to take a minute and come to your comments and just make sure my studio is all set up and ready to rock before I zone in to teaching mode. How's everybody doing? Rebecca, Sharon Wolpoff, how are you? We've got Denise. We have got Stacy Snow. What's going on, Stacy Snow? And by the way, we're streaming live to YouTube and Facebook. I'm just going to check in with my team to make sure everything is going well. I actually had a lot of tech issues getting ready today. That's why I was somewhat delayed. Luckily, I was able to pull it off. I didn't have internet up in my studio, which I had to figure out. So back to double shot energy, y'all. It's going to be a thing to buckle in for. There's a lot ahead, a lot to take in, and I'm super excited to teach it to you. So, hey, hello, Renee, Jennifer Hopkins, McCaleb. That's a long name. How are you doing? Carol Wimmert, how are you? Beverly Grace. All right, Phoebe Mao Wing. Nice to see you. Okay, well, I'm so excited you guys are all here. Little late notice, I know, for it tonight. It's been that kind of week, but we're here. Let's do this. Let's do this. Who is ready for some archetypes? So let's dive in first with what archetypes are. What is an archetype? And I just want to say and humble myself here, that the subject of archetypes is enormous. And this is not the last word on them by any means. And on the shoulders of Carl Jung and Carolyn Mace and other people that have been my teachers and that I really respect, do I also stand. And a lot of the Jungian proteges out there and Jungian people that went off to create their own understanding of archetypes, on their shoulders I also stand. But I will say, I have a very, very unique relationship with archetypes and understanding of them that came out of thousands of intuitive readings over 2 decades. And what I found is there's so much. First, there's many definitions, and they all, to me, are relevant and accurate in their own way. It just depends on the lens you're looking through. Now, for me, as I'm going to teach you about 4 different categories, how I define an archetype comes down to the category that I'm assigning that archetype to in your psyche, in your contract, in your creative journey of life. So archetypes function in multiple different ways. Let's first look at the Jungian lens, because it might be the one that you're more familiar with, and certainly I think it still stands the test of time. Jung felt that archetypes were universal patterns or primary symbols or forces in people that operate within the human psyche and also the collective unconscious and support the process of what he called individuation. Now, let me translate some of that. A lot of big words in there. Jung's work was about studying the journey of us becoming who we are. That's what individuation means, becoming an individual. So his work with archetypes, which is voluminous, profound, there's so many, brilliant, genius, and truly a lifetime study that I still engage. I love his work. It really was what kicked off, I think, in our modern era, especially an understanding of what archetypes are and how they're in us. And they're also in the collective, as he would say, the collective unconscious. So let's ground this with an example. So one of the examples that is universal for all of us is the child archetype. Because we were all children before we became adults, provided that we actually grew up into true adulthood. That's another story, but we've all experienced a childhood to get here, right? So the child archetype, that pattern of development, is universal. There's not a human being on this planet that doesn't have that archetype. There isn't one, because we all were children at one time. Therefore, it becomes a universal force of development in our psyche and in our collective. And then that begs the question, well, as a universal force of development, what comprises the child archetype? Now, next week, I'm going to do another social live just on this archetype. So I'm going to kind of just give you some grounding here. Remember, we're in the Jungian lens so far around this archetype, but this force in all of us is a pattern of development, deals with everything our childhood was about. So it's a pattern that deals with our safety, security, esteem, and survival. These are the 4 pillars in the child that I've identified in readings, and obviously in myself, that matter. Your child archetype, the child in you, that pattern, that force in you, that part of your psyche. See, I'm dancing around here because it's all true. These are all ways I'm defining and getting you engaged in this archetype. It's a pattern that experienced the vulnerability of childhood and then also experienced whatever it meant to be in the psyche of a child. So in the pattern of the child archetype is a certain limit of psychology, because children are not, as children, we were not mature enough to hold the complexities of adult life. We watched maybe cartoons, and that was how we got into the mix of adult relating or relating to life. And we're going through these different stages all throughout childhood of, yes, opening into greater and greater psychological complexity. But we were not at this level for the most part. There's exceptions like rare Buddhas here and there. But for the most part, we weren't capable of understanding something like this. My mother's depression has nothing to do with me. Rather, as children, we don't understand what is depression. We don't understand moodiness. We don't understand someone in a depressed state. We don't understand that level of psychology. So what did we maybe do as children? Possibly. This might apply to you. We identified any emotional state with our parents as having something to do with us. because that's all a child knows to do. And furthermore, in the pattern of the child archetype, we're trying to survive, man. I mean, we're trying to make sure our parents clothe us, feed us, get us to school, get us educated, protect us. So we're tracking that. Now, it's not like you were 5 years old and you're like, okay, today I'm tracking my parents. Rather, your subconscious was on it like that. The human subconscious mind, this brilliant data bank piece of sort of software in us, was tracking the survival needs. Because here's the thing, as children, we can't make it on our own. We can't go get jobs. We can't defend ourselves. So this pattern, it's universal. Each and every one of us as children were involved in this pattern. And now as adults, we would say that constitutes our inner child, right? When you hear in family, psychological family systems or parenting psychology, and you go through therapy, right? Some sort of family-based therapy. There, of course, you're dealing with something that was, really, I'd say since the 50s or even 70s, big for therapeutic circles, and that is the inner child. And man, that's why I'm taking next week to talk just about that, because it is such a powerful force in you, the child archetype in you, the inner child archetype in you. So that just gives you, in terms of a Jungian sense, a way to understand the universality of some archetypes. Now, while universal, I've also found, and I think Jung did as well, that archetypes can also become more specific to you, to your own life. So let's go back to the child for a second. If you were to tell me, if you were to describe for me your child archetype, what would you say? The inner child in you, what would you say? Now let me guide this a little. So one way in is to go, okay, well, what was the common predominant experience that I had of childhood? And if you were to say, well, Robert, that for me was abandonment and abuse. I go, okay, that was the common, most consistent overall experience of your childhood. And that's, true for lots of people in various ways. And that's next week when we get there. But then I would say, well, okay, let's get more specific. Is this a wounded child, do you think? Do you think you have the orphan child? Did you feel orphaned a lot? Abandoned child, and then how would you qualify that experience of abandonment? Was it really your parents just weren't around, or did they actually abandon you in other ways that were more emotional? They were around, but they were not emotionally present. Were they kind of the opposite, hyper emotional in a way that was violent and rageful? And now we're going to go, okay, well, what archetype in you, what child archetype do you feel you're connecting to? Now, not all of us had that extreme of an experience in childhood. I happen to be someone who did, but not everybody has that. And yet what's also true is that and I could get more specific, and I will next week, everyone was born into a shame-based culture, which is a wounding force in everybody. And that shame, most likely, did a torch pass from culture to your parents and their parenting of you. So I'm going to say, well, you might have thought there was no emotional tension, violence, or maybe abandonment per se, but if your parents parented you in a shame-based way, well, then we got to talk about, what child am I looking at in you? Because there's something that has ruptured your holism, and that's what wounds are. And that's what shame does. So Jungian lens here, that we have this child in us, and that's universal. Now, that said, there's another archetype I can name too that I wanted to just throw out there that kind of steps out of some of the more wounded lane, and that's the, as they say, puer aeternus or puella aeternus, the eternal child. And you can see this in people, and I actually think it is an adaptation to some kind of wounding, but that just never want to grow up. That's the eternal child. I never want to grow up. Now, that said, let's look at my dear colleague, Carolyn Mace, and her work with archetypes. And then I'll bring in how she sees the child, just to kind of contrast and bring different points of view. And of course, I'm going to end up on my own work. But in Carolyn Mesa's work with sacred contracts, and she has a great book called Sacred Contracts you might want to check out, she talks about archetypes as energy guides that direct people toward their spiritual purpose, toward their sacred contract. And her saying sacred contract is really synonymous with me saying soul contract. It's the same idea. And we are not the only ones that have ever talked about this. I would say if I went back to the first person who maybe mapped what's something like a sacred contract, I'd have to go to Plato. In his Myth of Air, he talks about this soldier dying on a funeral pyre and going to the underworld and meeting the three fates for reincarnation. And once again, if you will, getting another contract to reincarnate through and have another journey of life. So the idea has been, which is in the sense very Platonic, has been around for thousands of years. So, but now we're in this new time of understanding it with incredible precision, which I'm going to share with you. Now, in Mesa's work, she identified that we have universally 4 survival archetypes, of which the child is one. So in her work, she looked at and she, just like me, got a lot of her insights from her readings, which evolved out of her medical intuitive skills into an archetypal realm of seeing people. I kind of started in the reverse. I started at the archetypal realm and got more specific, never to health, but more to, one could say, psychological holism, psychological health, and also your sense of destiny and your soul and your sacred agreements that are inside of all of that. That's my lane. Now, speaking of which, let's just talk a bit about my perspective on archetypes. And I would say, well, all of the above: Jung, Mace, other people and their ideas of archetypes, I'm probably going to resonate with. I'm a systems guy. I'm a technician. So I want to look at things as technically precise as possible. It's exactly how I do a reading. I want to see you technically. In seeing you technically, there's a lot of gifts. I'm going to see what is. I'm not going to see any projections. I'm not going to see, and this is where clear intuition becomes an ace in the hole. I'm going to see you as a system. So in my work, an archetype is, and let me give you one layer because it's the main one I want to bring you into in this particular social life. In my work, an archetype is something in you that, yes, can be universal. Everything Mace and Jung have brought, absolutely. And I would also frame it this way. An archetype in you is a pattern or force in you that manages something. Now, what does that mean? Well, it can manage your shame. It could manage your survival. It could manage your gifts and skills. It could manage your grace. It could manage your abandonment fear. An archetype in you, why you have archetypes in your psyche, when I look at you, I'm looking at, well, what's being managed by them in your system? I'm looking at you as a system of, let's say, survival management, abandonment management, rejection management, thriving management, co-creative management. I could go on and on. I hope you're getting me. Now, that said, let's just bring up some archetypes and riff around for a minute. And then as I continue into what I want to share with you in the social live, the definition I have for archetypes will continue to expand because I'm going to define it the whole time I'm talking to you here. So what does a perfectionist archetype manage in someone? Maybe you. It's an archetype I happen to have and know all too well. But have you ever thought about the patterns in you, the parts of you, if you want to call it that, the forces in you and what they manage? Now, I'm starting to give you hints on how to identify your own archetypes. We're going to get there. But I want you to now just go, yeah, what manages me? My power, my choices, my vulnerability, my need to survive, my desires to thrive, my potential, my destiny. What manages that? So the perfectionist in someone manages, amongst other things, one's shame. So it kind of goes like this. And this is one of those archetypes that I'm going to teach you about that's actually not only socially and culturally inherited, because we live in a shame-based culture, this archetype is actually part of social fabric. Anytime you see ads, on Instagram, I guess that's where we see them these days, or Facebook, or I don't know, YouTube. A lot of times those ads are designed to trigger your perfectionist. They're designed to make you go, oh, this will fix me finally. This, I don't know, product, those clothes, this new course, this whatever it is, it'll finally fix me. And so each archetype has its own vocabulary. Another way you can start to identify your archetypes. And so one of the words in the vocabulary of the perfectionist is fix. Or let's throw in some more. Get rid of. I'm going to get rid of my perfectionist. Says you're a perfectionist. So when you look at this pattern and you get technical and take a step back, you can go, well, what does it manage for me? Now, shame is one thing. So what is that? Well, there's something inherently effed up about me, and I can never let the world see it. Well, why not? Well, because people will abandon me if they do. If they know I'm not perfect, I'm going to be judged, I'm going to be abandoned, and I'm going to be rejected. I'm going to be unlovable. Go down all the things in you that the perfectionist manages. So this is an archetype that most of us probably have somewhere in us. Let's be honest, because it's culturally inherited, meaning we're all individuals that make up a culture. And archetypes, I'm kind of skipping ahead here, but whatever, they can be inherited like psychic DNA. So you've got archetypes in you that you were just simply through your fate born into. And the perfectionist is one of them, absolutely, because it is a cultural, sociocultural archetype. We're taught, hey, be perfect because then you can't be judged. Then who would abandon someone who's perfect? Then you can what? Have more control. So the perfectionist manages shame, yes, and a sense of being in control. Of course, it's illusory. We can never, first of all, be perfect. Part one, part two, we can't guarantee anyone's going to stay around. Anyone can leave us at any time, abandon us at any time. So gig is already up. Now, what about something like the bully? What would the bully in someone manage? Well, let's look at those who have this archetype. And now I'm going to say, well, the bully would manage someone's low esteem and sense of powerlessness and emasculation. So the bully archetype is about, I've got to disempower you through the bullying, which is another way of saying I'm going to rape you for your power. I'm going to, through my bullying, however that's going to go, I'm going to call you a name. I'm going to punch you in the face. I'm going to physically threaten you. I'm going to kick you down. Whether literally or metaphorically, I am going to do something that sets a certain sense in our relationship that I have the power and you don't. That I have value and you don't. So in a way, the bully is a vampiric force in people. It seeks to take power, vampirize someone's power and obviously esteem as a way to get to some sense of control, protection, and enoughness. So that could be something the bully manages in someone. And there's more, but I want to keep moving on. So what about the invisible child? This is a very interesting archetype to look at. What does it manage in someone? Well, if you grew up in a house where there was abuse, and if you grew up in a house where if you were seen, you took a hit. Now, being seen, I'm being metaphorical and literal. Being seen as speaking up to your parents, telling them some sort of inconvenient truth, being just you, creatively you, in a way that's off-putting to them or that they feel mirrors back to them or triggers in them some other wound that they have. So there's a sense of, ooh, not a good thing to be seen. Yes, children should be not only heard, but invisible. Not only not heard, but invisible. And so you adapt the invisible child. Well, I'm going to just go invisible now because then I won't be a target anymore. They can't see me. And how did that look? Maybe you just never said anything as a kid. You were very quiet. Maybe you actually kind of hid out literally around the house. Maybe as soon as you had, the capacity to get out of the home, you left as much as you could. So many ways this will operate, but what is it managing? Well, some sense of threat from your home, some sense of, I need protection. So better to be invisible than seen. And I'm going to come back to that archetype in a minute and talk about its magnetics. But let's look at something a little less, let's say, on a more negative side in terms of an archetype. What about the designer archetype? What would that manage in someone? Well, if you've got this wonderful capacity at the level of your soul, you were born with it, you brought it in, to put spaces together, to create a certain aesthetic when you're looking at something and its system, to somehow you have this intuitive knack for how to bring things into a harmonic flow. And you can design it. You can create it. You can create cool clothes. You can create living spaces. You can design homes. Well, that's what it manages. It manages this creative, interior, soulful genius in you. And you do have archetypes that manage that arena of you. The artistic side, the genius side of you. Do you know what those might be for you? Now, what about the artist? Speaking of which, what does that manage as an archetype? Well, it manages someone's creativity and creative expression and capacity to create art, right? Now, we'll end on a negative one here, but don't worry, I'm going to come back to the light. And this is just an interesting one because I think it's very, this is an archetype that's very, that has become very socially conscious in recent years. What does a racist in someone manage? That's an archetype. It's a pattern. If I were to say to you, that person's a racist, you immediately download their profile and you begin to understand certain things about them. It's called, actually, in a sense, an intuitive reading. You begin to go, oh, they're a racist. Okay, they have that pattern. All right. Now I'll follow it up with, okay, well, what does that manage in someone? What would make someone feel that they need to put another race down and step on them to elevate themselves? Because that's what the racist does. Well, they must not have very much esteem. It's a lot of low worth up in there. There's a lot of a fear that maybe life won't provide enough for all of us equally, so I better be the superior race to you to survive. So you see, archetypes, I'm landing in a different zone. They manage something, whether that's a soulful gift or a toxic survival fear, or a genuine fear, a healthy fear, or just a real genuine need for protection. They manage something in you. Now, that said, archetypes can be conscious or unconscious. And when an archetype is unconscious in us, this is when that particular force will usually show up in shadow form. Some archetypes are just, to me, shadowy anyway. Like, there might be some benefits to a perfectionist, might be, a perfectionist way to approach life. I can't think of any, but it's to me a shadow archetype, meaning it's managing something that has not been integrated into love, into power, into the light of you. and into acceptance and into your soul esteem, which is you're enough no matter what. So that said, let me give you an example of an archetype that's both light and shadow, the rescuer. Now, I always love using this example because I think it's very relatable, and it kind of is something you can observe in yourself to see where you're at with it. And a lot of us have this archetype, especially those of us who are healers or helpers in the world, the rescuer. So the rescuer in light form is about rescuing people, helping them when they lack the certain empowerment, means, or resources to help themselves. So you throw a lifeline, you rescue. So someone who's a firefighter is going to go into a burning building and save people in, some sort of fire danger or situation like that because they're equipped for it. They have the gear, they have the strength, they have this certain relationship with fire itself to know, okay, this fire is a being and I have a relationship with it, and I have to understand how to negotiate that relationship right now to save your life and get you out of this burning home. So let's do this. Let's go. Now, that's the rescuer in light form. Let's take a shift into shadow form, and let's stay with the firefighter. So if I were a shadow rescuer as a shadow, let's say, firefighter, it would go something like this. Okay, I'm on the scene. There's a burning house and there's a family in there. I got to get them out. And okay, let's do this. Here I go. Rescue, rescue, rescue. And once I'm done, I'm going to look at you and I'm going to say, hey, I'm so glad you're alive. But here's the thing. I need you to tell me how wonderful I am for rescuing you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you my phone number. You can text me all the time and tell me how great it was I rescued you. And also, I'd like you to contact, 9 News and see if they want to do a feature on this, this fire rescue mission. If you could do that for me as just, something to pay me back for saving your life, that would be great. Now, it's a laughable example, but now think of you and think of people you know and those that help you, but they help you from the shadow rescuer. Meaning there's a sense of I rescue you so that I can get to enough. So whatever I do with you, this is what it manages. If I rescue you financially, emotionally, like a fire, or if you're drowning, or whatever it is, however I rescue you, what I expect in return is you to pump my esteem up. Tell me how amazing I am for having rescued you. Do you have people in your life, or is this you and all the love, if it is, that have done stuff for you, but you can feel the stickiness of the strings. You can feel the expectation, the conditions of the rescue. And they're usually around this arena. Okay, if I rescue you, you can never leave me. If I rescue you, you have to tell me how great I am. And that's when an archetype or a pattern has gone to shadow form and shadow choices and actions. So archetypes can either just be straight up shadow, like the perfectionist, or they can be light or shadow. And let me give another kind of interesting example as well, because one would start to think, okay, well, based on what Ohado just said, I bet the liar archetype is a shadow force. Is it? Is there ever a time when lying is not a shadow maneuver? Well, I don't know. What about the people that housed Anne Frank and lied to the Nazis? Or other people that have lied to protect somebody in life or death ways? What about that? And this is where I want to just throw in a little curveball and say, well, what an archetype does in your life, how you work with it, what it manages or executes for you, ultimately also is connected to intentionality. Why do you do what you do? And I wouldn't just say the liar's a shadow force. It can be, and a lot of times is, but I can't say it always is. So, little contrast there. Now, to understand when an archetype has gone dark requires that you understand how your own human shadow is created in the first place. Like, how do you have this thing called the shadow? Now, I'm going to show you, it's from one of my courses actually on magnetics, a little image here that's a map of how the shadow is created. And I'm just going to stay on this piece for just a second. But what this shows you is, if you could imagine, once again, what we're looking at here is your psyche and its anatomy as a system. So on top there, I've got represented the ego. Then we've got this line from the soul coming up through layers of your psychic system, the human psyche. And let's just say what we're looking at here is some soul gift trying to break through and integrate into your identity and into your role in the world. And let me say it another way, some soul gift trying to embody itself through an archetype to express its grace into life. But what happens when that soul's gift is not something culture's really down with or happy about or can accept? So what if your soul's gift is to be a truth teller and you're in a culture and society and family that's held together by lies? And as you're a child, you're growing up and you're starting to tell truths, and then your family, society, religion, or culture is saying, yeah, we're not interested in your truth teller. So send that right to the shadow, baby. And that's exactly what happens. Whatever in us is not, for whatever reason, able to be integrated into our identity consciously as a creative force of destiny, or even just flat out, just positive survival, well, it's going to go to the shadow. So what if you were born into a family that expected you to become a surgeon because all the men in the family became surgeons? Oh yeah, and I did say men. It's a patriarchal family. Welcome to a patriarchal culture. It is about, this is what all the boys do in the family, but you decide, you know what? I know you want me to be a surgeon, but I'm a musician. I want to be in a rock band. So you think your family's going to be down with that? And be like, oh yeah, great. Drummer, guitarist, lead singer? Which is it going to be? Typically, no, that's not traditionally how the family psyche in our culture operates. There can be the sense of being shoved into the shadow with your creative artist. And then what might happen, and it just depends on your own unique system and your own unique contract, but what I've seen happen to some is that goes away. They then opt for what is on offer and acceptable to the family, society, and culture. And under the umbrella that you can't be an artist because artists starve. And then you journey out, maybe initially to break from the family in your artist archetype. And what happens? You starve. And then you collapse into the expectations the family had for you and you tell yourself, yeah, I guess artists do starve. So now you have a starving artist archetype. Now I could put a lot in here. I could put starving teacher. I could put starving healer. The starving archetypes, they all operate on this sort of system here. And then you're the one looking at another teacher, berating them for what they want to charge for a course. Because you're in your starving teacher. You're in your starving archetypes. Because now you're dealing with your own shadow. Now, this is interesting. So archetypes within the anatomy of the human psyche. This is going to lead us toward the 4 categories over time here. But I want to teach you one more thing about the human psyche and its anatomy when it comes to archetypes. And that is what I discovered, and it was really profound when I had this realization through readings. And it's become a foundation of how I understand you and myself, for that matter. What I began to see is that in the anatomy of the human psyche, we have this brilliant database software called the subconscious mind. And what the subconscious mind does is its primary objective, certainly earlier on in life, is your survival, period. And it will receive programming, i.e. archetypes, from, like I said, as psychic DNA, from family, culture, and society, based on what family, culture, and society have discovered or found to be aids in survival. So, hey, you know what I'm receiving from my family is this belief that artists starve. So, I know there's an artist in my soul. I brought it in, but you're just gonna have to stay in the shadow because I got to survive and eat in this world. So the subconscious then, what it does, and let's just take a little step back to the child archetype. It recruits, I like that word, archetypes to come manage something for your survival. Now I'm going to actually blow that out and say not just survival, safety, security, esteem, and survival. So the subconscious in you, when you were growing up, was archetypally drawing in and recruiting whatever it needed to help you survive childhood, adolescence, and now here you are as an adult. Now I'm going to ask you a question. And this is what happens, is you end up with actually an archetypal team in your interior that function as an inner system that manage safety, security, esteem, and survival for you. This isn't right or wrong. In fact, it's brilliant. However, as you probably know, it turns into a shit show of self-sabotage when you become an adult. To have your invisible child running your reality, running your relationships and magnetics. Your invisible child running your visibility, because that's what it's doing. What about your addict? What was it recruited to manage? I already talked about what you're a perfectionist. I mean, you end up with a team. Now, sidebar. This is where the dark night of the ego comes in that I've talked about since 2009 in my book, Transforming Fate into Destiny. I did a chapter on this, the dark night of the ego, because I began to see in people, it's not a dark night of your soul. It's a dark night of your psychology and identity. It's a dark night of really the wounded human ego. And what does that mean? Well, what it means is a dark night for the archetypal team that constitutes your identity. Now, that identity may not be something that's conscious. And that's usually what a dark night shows you, is how unconscious you are of how you've made perhaps the archetype in you of the victim, let's say shadow victim identity. And because of that, you have amped up certain magnetics and attracted and repelled people from your life through that one archetype alone. Now, that said, let's go to magnetics. And like I said, I did a 16-hour masterclass on this in November called Archetypes and Your Relationship Magnetics. Archetypes have their own magnetics that operate via 6 mystical laws that I've identified. And these are 6 mystical laws of archetypal attraction and relationship magnetics. Now, I'm not going to go into all 6 laws, but I'm going to pull one of the laws out. And it's probably one you're somewhat familiar with because there has been, as I'm sure you're aware, much ado about the law of attraction. Now, there is real truth in this law. There's a lot of fantasy and BS in the law. But what's also important to understand is how the law of magnetic attraction operates. It's not just about like attracting like. Opposites also attract. And also, we have to look at what is repelled. I want you to see yourself as a magnet. And magnets, yes, they attract and connect with other magnets. Yes, archetypes attract and connect with other archetypes, but there's also a repulsion that happens depending on the magnetics between two archetypes. I'm going to give you examples. I'm sure you're intrigued, but listen, one of the ways you can start to look at this, your magnetics, is go, well, who's in my life and why? And you can do that right now or later. Okay, this is your homework. You get homework on Friday night for the weekend. I want you to consider, like, who's in my life and why? It's a question that's so simple but powerful and intriguing to go, why are you in my life? Go through whatever relationships you feel called to kind of look at. Who's in my life and why? Why are we magnetically matched? Now, the why of that is too big for this time I have with you today, but it does connect to like attracting like and opposites attracting, and also sometimes like repelling like and opposites repelling. Before we get deeper into those magnetics, I want to give you a little framework that will help you identify your own archetypes. Now, you got to realize what I'm giving you here may to you seem like, but for me, this is Archetypes 101. And this is why I do master classes, is because there is so much, and that's why I love this topic. There's so much in the realm and world of archetypes. In fact, I'm doing an in-person event with Carolyn Mace on this subject in Santa Fe in November. Now, can you imagine her and I teaming up on archetypes? It's going down. It's happening, folks. How can you identify your own archetypes? One of the simplest ways that I can get you started is to do this. I want you to look at your patterns. And I want you to step back and go, okay, what are my primary patterns? Now, obviously, as I just mentioned, you've got patterns you're not aware of. They're in your unconscious. They're in your shadow. Cool. We're not dealing with that right now. But let's look at what you might have in your periphery of awareness or right in front of you. And that is the patterns that run your life right now. So if I said perfectionist and you looked at your life and went, do I have a pattern of perfectionism? And then you go, yeah, okay, it's one of your archetypes, done. And if I said, hey, do you have a pattern of being very mothering and nurturing to people and caring? And you went, yeah, I'd say, okay, you got the mother archetype. If I said to you, hey, do you have a pattern of, if we're honest, you hide. You hide. And you might tell yourself a story you don't, but it's not, it's a cover story, it's not the truth. And anytime you step onto stage and get visible, you have a team in you that sabotages you into invisibility again. And in spite of your best efforts to finally shine and be seen. If you relate to what I just said, and you have a pattern of this, I'd say, well, we're looking at your invisible child. And you can try to be seen all you want, but until we actually understand what this is managing for you and shift to something else that can manage what it's managing in a connecting way, visible way, you're going to stay invisible. Now, what are your magnetics as an invisible child? Well, I can tell you right now. You're going to attract people that actually don't see you. You're going to be drawn to them magnetically and them to you. And usually that looks like you're drawn to narcissists, because narcissists don't see anyone but themselves. The invisible child and the narcissist are a magnetic match. And it works per your subconscious system perfectly. You become invisible and they can project onto you anything that they need to see to be enough about themselves. That's what narcissists do. And then you don't see, you look in the mirror, you don't even see your damn self. Now, what else happens in this? Track with me. You don't see your needs. You don't see your dreams. You don't see your flossomeness. You don't see your potential. You're invisible. How could you? How could anyone? And your magnetics are going to continue and continue. And then you're going to find yourself maybe married to someone. And then you'll start saying, It's like they don't see me. Well, they don't. You're invisible. You're absolutely invisible. And some part of you still feels that's the best approach to survival. You're stuck in your childhood here. And even if you take stage, it's not exactly you. It's a cover version that perhaps you've actually engineered or, put up. But it's not you. And if it's not you, anything you receive from life in that cover version of you can't nourish you. It can only nourish the mask. And you see how freaking powerful understanding archetypes is. And how you begin to get a read on, your own shadow. This is it. Now, that said, getting back to identifying your archetypes, you're going to look at your patterns and you're going to give them a name. Just like I did. Hey, you got these mothering things going on? Mother archetype. Do you try to stay hidden? Invisible child. Now, I got to make space for the fact that you might not be able to identify some of these because it's too far in your shadow. That's why I use the invisible child to pull it out, because I think it's going to relate to a lot of you. So what are your patterns? And what would you call them? So, hey, I have a passion for teaching. I've always loved teaching. I've always been called by life to teach. I have the teacher archetype. I teach. And there you go. There's one of my patterns. And that's a soul archetype for me. Yeah, that's a category we're going to talk about, soul archetypes. Now, let's look at another way to identify archetypes. So if you're going, okay, pattern, give it a name. Okay, got it. Can we expand a bit? Yes, we can. Another way to look at what your archetypes are is to look at the roles that you play to people in your life and to yourself. So if you play rescuer as a role, I'm not saying shadow rescuer yet, but you could throw that in too. I gave you the example of a shadow rescuer. It's a pattern of rescuing to get to enough, or to get to a sense of not feeling like people are gonna. It's a pattern that gets you to managing your fears of abandonment, which is still connected to being enough. Rescuer. Do you happen to have a role or a pattern where you rescue people? Maybe it's your job. I mean, if it's your job, if you're a doctor, if you're a medic, if you're a actual firefighter, police officer, lifeguard, rescuer. What about healer? Do you find yourself working with healing all the time? It's a pattern. It's a pattern of how you engage life. What about the hopeless romantic? Is that something you self-identify as? Or, when you're watching rom-coms, it's always the hopeless romantic rom-com. One of the ways you can also start to look at your own archetypes is by identifying them through the stories, like movies, that you're drawn to. Do you like the action hero stories? Do you like, what do you like? The knight and damsel stories. What about, do you advocate? Are you someone that just can't help yourself? You stick up for people. I have that archetype. Where, if you see someone being bullied, you're on the scene. The protector and advocate are, boom, right there. Do you have the codependent? You find yourself always somehow, and let's up the game. Let's say the victimized empath codependent, where you're feeling everyone codependently to manage them, because managing them, you learned as a kid, helps you get to safety, security, esteem, and survival. So your subconscious thinks, and so does your child. So let me feel it all. Let me feel those feelings for you, because I don't want you mad at me or not liking me. So let me take that on. So if you have that pattern, well, I would say you have the codependent or codependent empath pattern. And yeah, it does victimize you. It sucks to feel everything for everybody. And it's also not useful for anyone. Now, come back to the question, who is in my life and why? And let's look at identifying our archetypes through who is in our lives. Now, if I had time, or if you want to go take my masterclass on this, I would teach you how the various archetypal matches that exist and how matches are made. But what you want to look at for now is, okay, do I have partners or projects in my life? Well, if you got a project and people that are in your life are projects, meaning I got to fix, manage, rescue, find solutions. Yeah. It's a project. But if you have a partner, well, now it's different. There's no one to fix. We don't need fixing. This is about connection. This is about partnership. It's about sharing in a co-creative responsibility and support for each other, for our lives' paths, and cultivating more love. If it's that kind of partnership, maybe it's a business partnership. This is where you start to see, hey, what are my patterns and why are you in my life in relationship to them? And why am I in yours? So, if I'm a shadow rescuer, I'm going to need people that need rescuing, whether that's because they're wounded, they're fill in the blank. Now, let's take a little bit of a deeper dive and let's look at the invisible child again. I talked about what it attracts, people that can't see you. Typically, one of the matches is a narcissist archetype in somebody. But what does it also repel? I don't know if you ever thought of, because everyone always talks about attraction as some false god. Just saying. But if you ever thought about, wow, what do the forces and patterns in me actually keep away from my life? So if I'm a codependent person, I'm going to repel people who are interdependent. They're not going to want to have anything to do with me because that's not their jam. There's no magnetics. Interdependent people look for other interdependent people, not codependent people. Why does a codependent need someone to manage? Well, because that's how they get their esteem. I know I'm enough if I manage you. And if I manage you, that, says the codependent, means that I ward off you abandoning me because why? You need me. Now let me slot in another archetype and it fits this framing exactly as well, and that's the blood donor. Why does a blood donor match with a vampire? What's the magnetics there? Why do blood donors attract vampires and vampires blood donors? Because they both need each other for different reasons. But the blood donor needs the vampire because it's about the need itself that gives them esteem. Here's the problem. Okay, let's just image this. I'm a blood donor and my magnetics attract vampires. And so this is me walking around town. Any vampires out there? And your energy is doing exactly that if you have the blood donor archetype. It's exactly doing that. And then a vampire sniffs it out and goes, oh, I'm here. And the vampire, by the way, is a very seductive archetype. So it's going to find its way to your neck and it's going to take your blood. And initially, it's this, oh, they need me. No one's ever loved them like I can. No one's ever taken care of them like I will. And they just keep taking. Now you got to know the vampire is a subset of the narcissist archetype. So there's a bottomless pit in this force. It is never done taking your blood. It'll never be enough. Meanwhile, you run out of blood. You can't pump life force through your life because it's drained out to the vampire that's in your life. And after a while, your psyche takes a hit. Even maybe your physical health will start to take a hit. Your creativity, what creativity? There's no life force for it. Empowerment, what's power? It drains out of my neck every day. Now, that said, yeah, there's a need. It's about esteem. I feel like I'm enough because you need my blood. And until I find another way to feel like I'm enough, this system is exactly what I'm going to use until I don't know anything else. Now, how you get out of a system and into another system is a topic for a course. But what I'll tell you here is that you can. And then what happens then? I call this neutralizing an archetype. And when you neutralize, let's say, the blood donor, you also neutralize its magnetics. And then you're going to repel vampires. So those that don't draw vampires into their lives is because they have archetypes that aren't a match magnetically. And those that do, well, yeah, you're a match. So, this is where I hear a lot of people speak through their victim. Hey, I just have all these narcissists in my life and they're always violating my boundaries. And very true, possibly very true story. But where's your accountability for your own magnetics? It's found in understanding the why someone's in your life. Okay, that's the account of this victimization through the blood donor vampire you're in, and it's magnetics and matching. But why do you think there's all these vampires around you? And when I show you, well, this is why. This is about your esteem system and what you adapted. It's not like you consciously sat down and maybe your childhood and said, what really sounds great is vampires on the regular taken from me and needing me and my blood as a way to be enough. Once again, this is a subconscious. And then what we're looking at is the shift magnetically is we got to intervene somehow. Now, this is how you can start to see who you also repel. So if you were to say to me, Robert, here's the deal, dude. I am in this unrequited lover archetype. I like people that don't like me back. It's always this way. And what gives? And I would look at that archetype in you, the unrequited lover, and I would say, well, what are its magnetics? What does it manage for you? And then I would tell you, well, one of the things that might be managing for you is this. If you were to be in a genuine vulnerability with someone and ready for that kind of real intimacy, what's required is that person and you both need to be present. The unrequited lover doesn't want that. Does not want presence. It wants the fantasy and it wants the chase, and it actually ironically wants the rejection. Why? Because there's no real risk in any of that. And you're not in a system of vulnerability, healthy vulnerability, that can handle risk at that level. So who's attracted to you? Married people, locationally challenged people. Go down the list of the people you also find attractive. I didn't know they were married. Yes, you did. Don't tell me you're intuitive and you did not know that they were married. It was in their field from the minute you met them. Some part of you absolutely knew they were married. Or somewhere across the world where you can't see them, or cover stories will not change your magnetics, my friend. And then the person, this is the repulsion, the person that's present that might knock at your door and say, hey, I'm here, I'm ready, I'm in my emotional vulnerability. You ready? Let's do this. Let's do the reciprocal lover thing and have this amazing, adventurous, risky journey of intimacy. Your unrequited lover would slam the door in their face and go, no, I'm not attracted to you. And that would be pretty accurate to say. So the unrequited lover repels a genuine reciprocal lover. And anyone who's in that archetype reads you immediately and goes, you're not present, you're not ready, you're just going to reject me, and or sabotage whatever we could start. So next, where's the reciprocal, authentic, interdependent, ready lover out there? And then they'll find them. Yeah, like will attract like. Absolutely. And it'll also attract its opposite. And it'll repel. So now, how you feeling? Let me take a minute. I'm going to get some coffee. We jamming. You guys feeling me? Feeling the archetypes? Let me look at your comments here. I love talking about archetypes. Oh my gosh. As if you can tell. Brilliant. Thank you, Sally Weber. I appreciate that comment. All right. Yes. Great question. Great comments. So good, Jill Elaine McDonald. Thank you. All right. And we're just getting started. I got categories ahead here. Wonderful. Feeling it. Thank you, Donna. Appreciate that. Jacqueline Kasel. All right. Cover story. Yes, thank you. You can quote me on that, Louisa. Okay, well let's keep rolling, and then hey, Tony Brewer, wonderful. Let's keep rolling, and then I'll take some questions in a minute. We're kind of coming to the home stretch, actually. So let's recap a little bit. Identifying your own archetypes. Look at patterns, give them a name as best you can. This is not an exercise in perfectionism either. Just try it out. Don't give yourself some space to experiment with identifying your archetypes. You'll get there. I promise you, you'll get guided into the ones you're meant to really lock onto. And look at the roles you play. And once again, I've been focusing more on the shadow side of archetypes for good reason, and we're going to get to the soul archetypes and other archetypes shortly here that are really just wonderful and rich and in the light and nourishing experiences and manage you almost mystically. And that's really the key way I want to frame that. So hold tight into a balance here of, hey, this isn't right or wrong. Do not use this as one more way to beat yourself up. A lot of times when we get new information and it's really zinging in to our shadow and exposing and revealing things, our tendency is to use that as further ammunition to make ourselves wrong. Please, no. This is about always more love to that. You know, we have these shadow archetypes because they did not get a sense of safety and love. And some part of us perhaps didn't get that and then recruited them to stay safe. And there's no part that's done this more than your child archetype. So just come back to the light of soul esteem and flossomeness and both and. You know what? You're fucked up. Join the party. And you're also pretty damn awesome. I like to call that flossom. And that's the truth of who we are. And it's enough. So got an unrequited lover. Okay. Invisible child. Cool. You know, not fun. We don't have to lie, but it can be okay. And we can become curious about, hey, what are you managing for me? That is your first step to shift. Really. All right. So look at the roles you play in your life. Holistically look at them. And give those names. Like I said, are you an advocate? Are you a writer? Is that one of your roles? Are you someone who is a healer? Now, who's in your life and why? That's kind of where we are right now. And then that gives you even just more of a mirror through the magnetics of archetypes to understand your own self. The way that I think looking at relationships is most useful is to get to your shadow. If you start to do an inventory and you look at people in your life and you give them an archetypal name, that then gives you a mirrored opportunity to go, what does that say about me? Now, I got to do a caveat here. Sometimes we have people in our lives via circumstantial power structures or like jobs, etc. And they're in our lives because of that. So yeah, I got a bully for a boss, but I don't let that, gut me. They try, but it doesn't work. Okay. You're not magnetically engaging the power play. That can happen. Just because someone's in your life doesn't immediately reflect back to you per se that, okay, if it's a bully, then I'm probably in some deep sense of shadow victim, or maybe very accurate, and both, and circumstantial, and guess what, So I want to lay a few dimensions down that give you some room to evaluate yourself in a more accurate sense and not put all on yourself like who was in my life is because of my magnetics. Sometimes it's, and a lot of times it's very true. Sometimes it's circumstantial. And if it is, you'll know because you don't shadow dance with them in a way where you lose power. You might shadow dance with them, but not in a way that you lose power. All right. Now, what parts of you relate to other people? That's another way to look at the archetypes in you that relate to other people. So you do want to look at your relationships. And now let's take a deeper step into identifying the archetypes that manage your relationships, period. So if I were to say to you, hey, I want you to look at just the general sense of all your relationships in your life. And can you name one part of you that is present in each relationship? And what is it? So if you were to say, in every relationship I have, I give people wise counsel. I would go, wow, the counselor is one of your relationship archetypes, and it's in every relationship you have. Okay. Now then we can go from there into, well, is this the counselor that's on an archetypal team in you that's about shadow rescuing everybody? Or is this the counselor that is from the soul of you, connecting in deeper intimacy and wise counsel with people in a way that's nourishing for both of you? Where we're at with this counselor, what is it managing? Are you trying to fix people through the counseling so that they don't abandon you, or so that they finally get healthy enough to be with you? Where are you going? What is this doing? The key is always, always, always in what an archetype is managing, especially when it comes to relationships. And then we want to take that same thing into our interior and go, what does it manage in my inner system of self? So how do those parts manage, and this is the key, your vulnerability? What do I mean by vulnerability? It's a bit of a buzzword, especially since the wonderful work of Brené Brown hit the scene. But when I think of vulnerability, I'm thinking of your fears of rejection, you're not feeling like you're enough, not being liked, and possibly being abandoned. There's some vulnerability in all of that. And I think we experience that vulnerability in every relationship we ever have. We always risk not being liked, being rejected, being told we're not enough, and being abandoned. You're not opting. No one's opted out of that. It's part of the vulnerability of being alive. So what manages that for you? Now, when we contrast around here, if you were to say, well, like I gave the example before, what manages that? My unrequited lover. Now let me throw in another one, my unrequited giver. They're actually different. They're different patterns. They can team up, but they're actually different patterns. The unrequited giver, this is one of my archetypes. just gives and gives and gives to keep people from abandoning them, to hope that people will like them, you overgive. And there's generally with this, because it's a shadow archetype, not a magnetics of reciprocity. You don't receive back from those that you overgive to. Okay, well, what's that managing? Now, then you want to pull that to the magnetics. An overgiver is going to draw magnetically to them, oftentimes, takers. Not always. Now, once again, have you ever been around an overgiver and you felt like, I'm good, I don't need any more? Why are you still giving? That right there says, wait. These magnetics don't feel right. And there's some shadow string attached to the giving you're doing, and I see you disconnecting from yourself while you give this much. Count me out. Thank you, but no thanks. So, I've had people in my life that have been that way to me, where it's like, this feels too weird. I don't like, this doesn't look good on you. So anyway, this also tracks us into, when we're in the territory of our vulnerability in relationships, the child archetype. Now, the child in us, and that's why next week I'm going to talk about that alone, just that, is something that really connects to our inner sense of parental figures. I call this your internalized parents, right? So you had your actual literal parents, possibly, guardians, depending on your situation. And sometimes it's just one parent or none. But whatever it is, there's an internalization of all of that into inner parents. Even if you didn't have any, you internalize something about that. And then that's what takes care of your inner child. Oof. Did you just cringe like I did when I said that? And out of that, sometimes what we do is when we go out to relate to the world and to have relationships, we look for mommy or daddy. Or we look for the ideal or optimal parent we never got to experience. Now, sidebar, some folks, what I just said becomes the foundation of their intimacy in a marriage or a relationship. And not only that, this is the base of their marriage vows. A lot of times I've done readings on many women who married a man to find out what they really married was a man-child. And that's why they're coming to me for a reading. I'm married to a man-child, Robert. I've realized I'm tired of being mommy. So we want to be mindful of the power of the child in you. I will tell you, I'm working on a course right now that I'm going to start in May on mace.com. That's all about the child archetype. And as I'm developing this course, it is shaking me to my core. It's going to make me cry. Because I'm realizing that the child in us, that archetype, there is nothing more powerful and core to our psyche, initially anyway, in our development than the child. I guarantee you, your child and its magnetics have co-created your life, and everything about your childhood echoes in who you are right now and has echoed in all the choices you've made as an adult. It's profound to consider the power of this one archetype and the team in you that it's recruited. And that's what I want to enforce here, is that archetypes in us, most notably the child, can recruit a whole team of management. Now, when it comes to the child, what's being managed is safety, security, esteem, survival, and fears of abandonment. You want to know who's on your child team? Little prep for next week. I want you to consider everything in you that manages that. Now, I want to segue from there into the 4 categories of archetypes. to give you a sense of a bigger, systematic way to see your archetypes in a way that I find to be, and I've discovered to be, very accurate, because it's what was revealed to me in readings, was that we have 4 different categories of archetypes. Now, these archetypes and these 4 categories go all around the board. On one hand, I would sum it up and say what these comprise, these 4 categories of archetypes, is your soul contract in this life. All your soul agreements are found in how these 4 categories interrelate and also on their own create your life. So we're going to start from the deepest place, and I'm going to introduce you to soul archetypes. Soul archetypes are forces in you that are just that. They're forces of your soul. They came in with you. You were not born, in case you were confused or wondering, a tabula rasa, where all you became in life and all you've become in life is just what culture, society, and family imprinted on you and expected of you. You came in with something. You came in with many things, and I'm going to call them archetypes. And these are forces that don't show up immediately necessarily all the time in someone. A lot of times, for example, one has to clear the let me say it this way, create the right feng shui in one's psyche for a flow to let an archetype out of the shadow or unconscious, a soul archetype. So if you were born into a family where artists were not allowed, but that's your soul. You have an artist soul. Well, maybe it took you till you were 40 before that force in you could move into identity, from the soul through the unconscious and shadow to identity, and now begin to magnetize and, yes, co-create your life. We all can probably look at ourselves and go, yeah, I didn't even know I had that force in me until I was 30. Because the expectations of family, society, and the heavy ass shame kept it in my shadow. And when I finally did enough inner work to love myself enough to ventilate my shadow, this thing popped up and said, hi, I'm part of your soul. You know, guess what? I'm the entrepreneur. You didn't know I existed in you, but I do. I've done many readings where I can see archetypes in people and I can see their soul archetypes. And I will name it to the client and they will not relate at all because it's that deep in their shadow. And then I'll get a call from them a year later, or a message or an email. Oh my God, you were right. Once I let it out, my life did a 180. My magnetics shifted. Damn right it did. I'm talking about the soul. So when you look at child proteges, these children that are born immediately gifted with music, math, chess, where do you think that comes from? They brought it in. I brought in a teacher. This was always here. And also I would say I brought in a wise counselor. I've always sort of had it. And yes, it was aware and then went into the unconscious and became aware again throughout certainly my childhood and adolescence, and then resurfaced when I was in college and then took off. But it was always there. So a lot of times we recognize these archetypes from when someone might have asked us, and if we were able to really touch in as kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? Well, we go, you know, what did you say? I actually said teacher. I said artist and teacher. And in a sense, I became both. I'm a performer teacher kind of, you know, so, but it was always there. And not to say it hasn't evolved or grown. Absolutely it has. But that was not something I had to develop as from scratch in this lifetime. There are archetypes that you do have to develop from scratch in this lifetime. And I call those destiny archetypes. So soul archetypes, you might have have been a natural born healer, writer, artist, like I've mentioned. Maybe you were a teacher. Maybe you just were born with this incredible capacity to sing. Get a sense in yourself, if you can, either the part of you or parts of you that showed up on the scene as a kid. Now I'm going to throw in an archetype here that I discovered through readings and did two master classes on. And it's just a way for me to language what I was seeing in readings in people that was evident at a soul level of them. And that is, I discovered on a soul level that, and this is probably you, most people that I worked with or were called to my classroom had what I call the empathic soul, which means that you arrived into life with a more developed bandwidth, more developed sense of energy senses, empathic senses that could pick up on more, a lot more than other people could. Now, not everyone's born with that. I think there's a little bit of story around at the soul level, we're all multisensory. Yes and no. Yes and no. I've seen it. I know for sure this is true. But you, my friend, probably were born with a lot of capacity with these badass psychic senses. Now imagine that being true. And now you are fusing into human five sensory psychology. And might I note, that is what our psychological systems are based in, is the human five senses. What I did in the Empathic Soul Love Rebel body of work was I began to pioneer a new multisensory psychology for multiple senses. And that's what's needed. And what I would say is, you know what archetype you have? You have the multisensory empathic child archetype. And now as an adult, you'd say I have the inner multisensory and empathic child archetype. Absolutely. And that is a very different archetype than just the inner child that our current psychology and family systems addresses. And it needs different parenting. It needs a parent that can parent with a multisensory sensibility. And I don't know anyone that's got that down or received that as a kid. So a little highlighting for next week, and my course, by the way, which is about this. That said, when you're looking at your categories of archetypes, you've got soul stuff came in. Were you an empathic soul? And let me just be clear. The way you might have felt this is so natural to you that you wouldn't have thought it was a big deal. Yeah, I feel the room. Yeah, I feel my parents. Yeah, I feel the neighbors. Yeah, I feel the animals and our pets. Yeah, I see shit sometimes in the house and, oh, there's grandma. Yeah, I talk to angels. Yeah. You think all kids do that? They don't. It's a certain configuration of soul, an empathic soul, that does that. And I've seen, I'm going to be general here, that most everyone in my courses or classes, or you, are empathic souls. Now, just want to put that out there as soul level archetypes. Now, that said, destiny archetypes. Contrasting from soul, something you bring in natively with you, destiny archetypes are developmental. And these are creative developmental forces and patterns that you have a soul contract to develop into. They're not necessarily native at all, but they're there as, hey, your soul signed up for it. You know what? This lifetime, I'm going to learn to be a teacher. Never done that one before. I'm going to learn how to be a writer. I'm going to learn how to, yes, be an entrepreneur. I'm going to now apprentice in my soul's evolution the healer archetype. I never did that before. Okay, cool. I got a contract for that. The way that you know you've got a destiny archetype is that, one, you consciously don't relate to it. I could say, oh, you have a soul contract to be a healer, and you'd go, what? Or to be an entrepreneur, and you'd be like, huh? Your wire's okay, Ohado? Because I don't know what the hell you're talking about. And I go, yeah. And then I'd say to you this. Is this a pattern? If I were to say to you, you have an archetype, you have a soul contract to become a pragmatist. And I'm looking at you, and you've already got the visionary. It's a soul archetype for you. You can envision stuff like this. But what you lack is a capacity to practically realize vision. So this lifetime, you need the pragmatist as one of your destiny archetypes. You have to learn how to work with the density of this realm, its karmic factors, its karmic momentum, and you're going to have to learn what a vision can actually be practically born, because not all of it can here. And it's going to be a rough lesson for you, my dear visionary. It's going to kick your damn ass. And you're going to have to use another archetype I've put in your contract called the mountain climber to get back up and keep climbing so that you can get to the summit and birth whatever you can of a vision of that on that mountain. So get going. And it'll talk to you just like that. Sometimes destiny archetypes are that shrewd. They're like, ain't nobody got time for your victim story. Get up. Try again. You'll get it. Just keep going. So you have destiny archetypes. And that can be anything. Maybe it is, and a lot of times it builds on our soul archetypes. And it's about this opus, this alchemical opus of leveling up and expanding out of the soul archetypes. And a lot of times the soul archetypes support this new path. Most of the time they do. But then we got to get into the mix of another category of archetypes to really understand the journey from soul to destiny. In the middle, we got to encounter fate. So you have fate archetypes. And what fate archetypes are is they're forces that are part of the Earth's psyche, the collective psyche on Earth of humanity. Now that's going to break down into culture, society, and family. And these were patterns that were here before you were born. You just fused into them. That's why it's called fate. Fate is something you're born into. It pre-exists before your incarnation, and you were born into it, and now you're off to the destiny. So let me give you one pattern: patriarchy. Everyone on this planet, for the most part, was born into that pattern. It's a pattern of the world in terms of how we function as a social and cultural structure, and ergo then family. We were born into patriarchy. Now, if you have a soul contract as a woman, or as really as anyone, no one wins in patriarchy. Men don't, because traditional patriarchy doesn't let men access the feminine half of their psyche any more than it lets women access their masculine. We're all screwed. The more obvious is, the women part, and that's been found in voting rights, equality, pay equality. I could go down the line. But trust me, when we get more holographic and holistic, no one's winning. So winning, what I mean by winning, no one's given free access to their own holism. Because the fate of the culture has mandated this is what you as a woman or man get access to, period. Don't cross wires, don't cross lines. Stay on your male-female side. Now, that's one example of a fate archetype. There's many more. Give a read of your whole sociocultural profile. If you were born into an African-American soul contract, well, you're negotiating now the fate pattern of racism in a dominant white culture, mostly around the world. If you were born LGBTQ, as I was, well, now you're negotiating the homophobia or transphobia or whatever phobia around sexuality and sexual identity that the culture harbors as a fate. That pattern existed before I was born. And it has been, absolutely been a fate that I've had to turn to destiny. And that's what happens with fate. We encounter it, it becomes this archetypal container, and we then source soul and the forces of destiny to alchemize fate into destiny. When it comes to fate, there's not a lot of choice. You can't right now look at me in the eye and say, well, I don't believe in fate, Robert. And I'll go, really, what about the fate of your body? You just gonna what? Choose a new one right now in front of me? I mean, you can go with surgeries and all sorts of other things, but your body's your body. And you're aging, by the way. You're on a timeline of mortality. What you doing about that? You think you got something magic pill you can take that's going to opt you out of that too? Is that what's going to come out of your mouth next? Because I'll tell you what, you're not going to get traction in your destiny with that nonsense. So we're very fate averse in our culture, even though it's so obviously part of the journey. That's why we can't even name what actually really kills people in obituaries. We've got to come up with some story about their death. So anyway, now other examples of fate archetypes, obviously ethnic, ethnicity is part of this. If you were born Nordic, as I was, if you were born Latino, if you were born Chinese, Asian, these are fates. And our soul is choosing these things for a reason. It's the optimal container for whatever destiny we were after in this life. Lesson, growth, evolution, expansion, etc. So where you're going to find a lot of your fate, though, is in culture, society, the world, and its patterns. And then there's the fate of your family. I mean, I can't count the many number of times I've heard people say, I chose this, really? I want a different contract. I'd have to say myself included a few times. But this is a cultural inheritance. This is a familial inheritance, our fate, a lot of the times. And it gets interesting to explore it from the point of view of how could we look at our fate as instructional in terms of the alchemy our soul set itself upon, rather than bemoan it or deny it. Why did I choose you? Why are you in my life and why? So, Now, there's another category here called that I've identified called survival archetypes of adaptation. And this is, I think, where it gets really powerful and interesting. What survival archetypes of adaptation are, and I named this category that for a reason. I chose those specific words specifically. Is I'm in the territory here of looking at the archetypes that your subconscious has engaged for your survival. So these survival forces, which is what these archetypes are, oftentimes will express as reactive forces or patterns in us. That's how you can kind of start to know, what are my survival archetypes of adaptation? Let me say it another way. Sometimes they're reactive, but also sometimes they're the default. So if it's your default to be a perfectionist, or if it's your default to shadow rescue, or if it's your default to sort of go to fantasy and deny, you got a real strong denier in you. Well, okay. And what's that protecting? What's that managing for you? If it's your default to people please, that's an archetype. If it's your default to shapeshift, become what people want you to be. Shadow shapeshift, I should say, actually. Okay. These are adaptations. Your system, your inner system, oftentimes through the magnetics of your child archetype, recruits these archetypal team players to help you survive. They're adaptations. When you're younger, oftentimes they saved your ass. They were brilliant back then. Now, get to adulthood, not so much. But this category is something that your subconscious mind adapted / recruited, most often, yes, during your childhood, to help you manage threats to your safety, security, esteem, survival, and abandonment. This was not a conscious process for the most part. You weren't at 6, 7, 8 years old going, what forces were going to help me survive this crazy family and this crazy racist culture and fill in your fate blanks. Well, it just happened. Now, these are not only patterns, I think these are also magnets. Like I've taught you, they can magnetize your life through 6 laws. I've only covered 1. And they can be handed down over generations. So if you were born into poverty and your family generationally has been poor, then if we went back to your great-grandparents, I'd want to see in your energy what archetypes they adapted and how that became lineage in psychic DNA and is in you, because I'm going to find it. And how over generation to generation to generation, maybe the adaptations changed and new team members came in to join the team. And here we are in your system, and I'm looking at you. So this is what I would say is your archetypal psychic DNA area. And it can be really anything. So, and this is where it gets very interesting when it comes to how psychiatry, as well as psychology and medicine, approach what I just named. They're looking at genetic factors. And I've seen in the energetics of this, that what starts out as an energetic or archetypal dynamic, yes, in fact, over generations can become actual physical DNA markers. And now we're in the territory of things like epigenetics and different discussions around what activates these, what I'm going to say are archetypal adaptations at the level of DNA. So just know you do have survival archetypes of adaptation. And the way you may recognize some of them now is as saboteurs. So back to this idea of genetics, things becoming genetic code over generations. Of course, they have found correlations in family lines between someone's susceptibility to become an addict or not, based on the addict lineage in a family system. Yeah, over time, it's going to become a somatic genetic factor. Now, whether someone becomes an addict or not, well, now we're in the territory of possibly an epigenetic factor. Hey, does that person in their soul's technology have a capacity to, let's say, put to bed one genetic factor and activate a mystical one in its place? Yes, that exists. And I would say is something in you that's a possibility, or you wouldn't be in synchronicity listening to me right now. And a lot of my courses are based all around just that. That is a new level of working with the alchemy of transforming fate to destiny. And it's a level I'm absolutely passionate about and teach courses on all the time. So I hope you've enjoyed this tour of survival archetypes, soul archetypes, destiny archetypes, and fate archetypes. These are the 4 primary categories, and I'd say almost definitive categories that comprise you. And I could blow this out into this holographic sense of how it's all interrelating. While I've separated them out into 4, they're all interrelating in you. And what's, I think, most crucial and where the most power is, initially anyway, is getting into these survival archetypes of adaptation and understanding how to neutralize them and activate soul forces and X factor forces in your field and in your psyche that then serve the destiny you were born for. So next week, we're going to take a deep look at the child alone, because it has so much to do with your, if not everything, to do with your survival archetypes of adaptation. And once we get those, once we get the technology in ourselves to redo that category of us, of archetypes, the survival archetypes of adaptation, that's the game changer. That sets us up for a whole nother discussion of destiny. Anyway, so I'm going to take a few cues and we're going to wrap it up and give you guys the weekend to chill out with this and meet you here back next Friday for a discussion about the child archetype. Just want to reiterate, although it's not on Carolyn Mace's website yet, I'm going to do a course on the intuitive adults, mystically self-parenting the inner multi-sensory and empathic child. I'll tell you more about it another time, but that's coming up in May. And it'll be on sale initially as part of the launch. You're not going to want to miss it. Trust me, it's a blowout, and it's a completely new paradigm and framework of working with your inner child that's never been done before, because I pioneered it. So can't wait to share with you. All right, any questions, everybody? Deborah Gibbs, you are so welcome. That reminds me, are you Debbie Gibbs? That's like the 80s singer. I love me some Debbie Gibbs. I love the 80s. Why couldn't the 80s just keep going? Does our birth chart indicate, I'm going to take this question. This is cool. Okay. I'm going to move this to the front of my production here. So Colleen Core asks, does our birth chart indicate solar destiny archetypes? It indicates all of them to me. Now, that's a whole nother discussion, but the short answer is absolutely. But the birth chart can indicate, if you bring your intuitive skill to a birth chart and know how to sense into that framework, and then really beyond that structure into the soul and psyche of the client, I'm just going to speak in client terms, that's where you're going to blow it up and see so much. And that's why I used in my readings more often than not someone's birth chart as an anchor, an archetypal anchoring of the information I could intuitively get out of their field and out of their psyche. It gave me the framework, and it is a brilliant, badass framework for that. But maybe I'll do a social life on that alone. That's a whole social life. But yes, Colleen, I love that question. Speaking to the astrologer in me. And that's where I've done a lot of pioneering around astrology, is to look at it from that lens that's more intuitive. There certainly has been a lot already done around psychological astrology. Liz Green was brilliant at pioneering that. But there's another level of the intuitive and archetypal that I think, I'm all about. So, all right. Love that question. All right. Louisa, thank you. Okay. Are there some sweet words I can use to convince my unrequited lover to let go of its desire for a married man? Well, first of all, thank you for the vulnerability of asking the question and standing in that. There aren't words. Words aren't going to cut it. There needs to be a strategy, a holistic one. And I can't go into all that would require here. It's because that's a big deal. But what I would just offer is this, Stephanie. You want to start to think about what the unrequited lover is for you managing. I would almost, as much as you can, introject back from the person that you're focused on and start to go, okay, this is mine to own. You're who you are, you're married, whatever, but I'm going to own, that this is a magnetic issue for me, and that there's something in me that doesn't know how to be in vulnerability in a way where I can meet someone who's actually really present and available. I don't know how, my system does not know how to make that connection. And then, can you hear my cat? And then making that connection, that then sets you up to, okay, well, let's get curious about that. What could in me become new technology of intimacy and attraction and magnetics that could then instead redo this. But you don't feel safe enough. So there's an issue of safety and your vulnerability and fears of abandonment and rejection here. You can't ever really be rejected by someone or abandoned by someone who was never really there in the first place. So in the unrequited lover pattern, no one's really ever there at all anyway. They're married, they're emotionally unavailable, they're locationally unavailable, they're age inappropriate. I've seen that one too. But they're not available. So I can't really be abandoned by them. That's why I choose that. I don't have to take I don't know how to be with the real risk. What? And so it is about, I've got to find some way to be with the reality that anyone can reject me. Anyone could abandon me. Anyone could say I'm not good enough. Anyone could shadow judge me, criticize me. You never have control there. Every time I step online, I risk that. Every time I give voice to an issue, especially when it's controversial, I risk that. But I have in me a way to be with that, okay, say what you want about me. It's mostly going to always be primarily a comment about you. And, I'm always open to critique. I'm not beyond reproach, but I also know when someone's just throwing shadow shit at me, because the language will say it, the approach will say it. And that's you. I'm not owning that. But I have that strength, right? Not everywhere. So make no mistake. But that's what I would offer you. It's a process, and it is absolutely realizable. That's why I do what I do. So just know that. All right. What else we got going on here? You guys could hear the cat. They're like, dude, it's time for our movie. I have 2 new kittens. They're let's see, almost, I think going on 9 months now. 8 months, 9 months, and I got them at 12 weeks. And they're amazing. I'll bring them on camera sometime. Okay, let's look at this question. Oh, there's some good ones here. You guys have great questions tonight. Louisa. And then I also want to take Kimberly Clifford, so I hope that stays around. How can we approach this work through a restorative justice system, knowing that there are so many injustices in the patriarchy we're still living under? Why I love this question is because it's a bit of an application of what I've been teaching tonight that goes to culture and to the systems of culture and society and the systemic issues in that. And Louisa, I feel you in this question, because obviously as a gay man and as someone who's watching so many just, wow, damaging and awful things happen in culture and politics, et cetera, and certainly wars around the world now, it's really something that's on my mind all the time and haunts me even. Like, how do we change? How do we change it? How do we change, as you're saying, a biased justice system that's punitive versus restorative? How do we change politics so that our representatives aren't worrying about re-election, but really worried about whether they do a good job serving us and all of us, no matter which party we're in? How do we change this stuff? And I think we have to be willing to just start where we can in our own personal zone. And then if we have a calling to go beyond our personal zone of influence, then we take baby steps into that as well. And I think also it is important and incumbent upon all of us to realize that we are all co-creating society and, let's say, systems together. So when you do vote for someone, you do want to holographically, with the eyes of your soul, get out of any party affiliation and just look at what karma you would empower in voting for them, because that karma is now attached to you. And so, and that's not to be perfectionist. It's to be, okay, I've got to go with the optimal person here that is most holistic or optimal move here, not just voting, but whatever advocacy, whatever you get into, or supporting advocates or supporting causes that is most holistic and capable of actually beginning real change. And we have to know we're up against momentum, depending on the issues. Certainly the justice system, that's a solid, what, for my country, 200 years in the making. So we've got, it's a heavy load, you know, and just to give that context and to know all efforts matter. And that we have to be okay. And this is a hard thing for a culture that likes its immediate gratification, and those of us that like that as well. We want everything Amazon Prime. You know, I want my justice reform on Amazon Prime. I want my you know, equality rights on Amazon Prime. Well, that's not going to happen. So what can happen? Let's get out of perfectionist Amazon Prime politics. Yeah, I get you. Hey, man, we got climate crisis breathing down our neck, and that is urgent. But I'm also practical enough to know, hey, the changes that are needed for that are not happening Amazon Prime style. So let's start with something and build momentum from there. Any transformation in your life typically starts with small steps, and that leads to more steps and more steps and more steps. Gay marriage for me was exactly that. That took 40 years of advocacy by the gay community to tip into legislation and law. But if we would have been like, well, it's 1960 and we want gay marriage now, we had gotten nowhere. Nowhere. So you got to keep fighting the good fight. You just do. And sadly, I have to say, but also maybe not sadly, we got to fight the fight on its terms. We got to know its karmic forces. We have to know, hey, this is the fight. Just because we don't like it doesn't mean it's still not the forces of the fight. So do you want to actually be with the actual forces of the fight? Because if you do that, then you will get guided to what can shift for now and what can shift next. I think that approach is where I would lean you, Louisa. I love the question. For anyone who is interested in healing culture in the world, yeah, we got to start somewhere. And sadly, what happens is because we want the Amazon Prime, we don't start anywhere. So yeah, we know we're screwed with the Earth's biosphere right now and the changing climate, and then nothing happens because it can't be fast enough for some people. It's too fast for oil companies. Yeah. Let's start somewhere. You know, all small things lead and have always led to big tipping points eventually. But it's the long game, you know, especially in some of the things we're facing in the world and in our societies and in our institutions. It's the long game. Even revolutions begin with small steps. So, all right, wonderful. Okay, you're fighting your Whole Foods in your neighborhood at the moment. Okay, I love it. Wonderful. Well, listen, everybody. I think I'm going to close up shop here. We're at time. Yeah, 2 hours. So I hope you enjoyed this. Please, once again, if you're on YouTube, like this video for me, please. It gets it out to more people. If you're on YouTube or Facebook, share it around. You know, you're supporting me is important as part of the reciprocity of giving and receiving. Let me receive a little, please. Yeah, it does help. So I really appreciate you doing that for me. And I'll see you next week, next Friday. Best way to stay apprised of that is on my newsletter. So go to ohotto.com, ohotto.com, sign up. You can unsubscribe at any time if you're not feeling it. But that is where I do let people know when I'm going to do a new social live and what that topic will be. And also, I have a podcast I'm launching this summer. So you might want to get on the newsletter to stay in the know about that and when that's going to hit around midsummer and what I'll be talking about. So, all right. Wonderful, everyone. Thank you for showing up and enjoying. And I hope this helped. I really do. I look forward to seeing your comments. Feel free to comment under the videos. I'll look at those a little bit later on. And okay, I'll see you next Friday. Namaste.